Hey everybody, welcome to FilmSnobbery Live. I'm your host Nick LaRue. This is episode 123, and I'm really excited because we have the 1, 2, 3 punch coming up for you. Wonderful guest for the show. Been a mainstay in the independent film industry for, since the mid 1970s. He is very active as a producer and as a marketer and working in the marketing and distribution arm of the independent film industry. He is the emeritus professor of the I'm going to mess it up if I get it. Is professor emeritus in the School of the Arts at Columbia University, where he's been since the 1980s, and since then he has been one of the most important figures in independent film, whether he wants me saying that or not. So he has worked with everyone from Soderbergh all the way to folks at the Samuel Golden Company, the Charlie Burnett, all these different folks. When I was writing my book, there were a couple of people at least that had very nice things to say about this gentleman. Ladies and gentlemen, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name correctly because it's been many years since I've heard it said out loud, but we'll see, right? Ladies and gentlemen, Ira Deutchman. Hello, sir.
I, by the way, you got the name right. That you shouldn't have worried.
Fantastic.
And thanks for that very flattering introduction. Although you made me feel a little old, but other than that,
Yeah,
very
I
nice.
I can't fix the direction of time. If that was the thing I could do, I'd probably be making a lot more money than I'm making now. But no, I appreciate it. No, you have been a mainstay in the industry for a long time, and I think that the value in that is just amazing, in as much as what you've been able to see, and being able to also check the you act as like check and balance, I think, to the what it happens in our industry. Like you're like, okay, yes, you're right. Something every year someone will say independent film is dead, and then you're like, yeah, but everyone was saying that 5 years ago too, and 5 years before that, and 5 years before that. So I think you have the that benefit of that history on you. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, you
Uh,
just hit on my most my favorite kind of mantra about the business is that at any given moment, everybody's always complaining that the worst it's ever been. And I keep thinking about all the moments over the years when people were complaining about the exact same thing. It is, it's a cyclical business. The entire history of independent film has been one where independent filmmakers, independent distributors, who have not always been aligned, but they constantly innovate. And the minute that they innovate, other companies, bigger companies, the major studios, the streamers now sort of get into the business and blow everybody out, and then they decide that it actually isn't a very good business, and they get out of it. And then there's a whole group of people who like bubble right under the surface and come back again. So anytime there's a kind of lull in the business, I always think about, well, have we hit bottom yet? Because it's probably going to turn around.
Yeah, now, and this may not necessarily be pertinent to independent film, but we have in the past. I mean, when we look at companies like Paramount, big companies like Paramount that were, acquired by other big companies like Gulf and Western or something like that, and then you have, that nowadays it's Silicon Valley has come in. Is there even a difference at this point, or are we just projecting a difference?
That's a good question. I mean, certainly there's the technology keeps changing, but the fundamentals kind of remain the same.
Right.
They've been predicting the death of theatrical film going for I think it started in the 1940s. Certainly in the 50s when television was first starting to be in people's living rooms, there was a moment of dread beginning of the 60s when I think it was 1962 or so when the vast majority of American homes had televisions at that point. Why would anybody go to a movie theater when you could see something at home? If that sounds familiar, it's because this has been an ongoing thing. Films were going to die when people were allowed to get VCRs. Films were going to die because DVDs were priced in a way that made it a mass market. You could just go on and on and on. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into predictions this early in this session,
Sure.
but I'm a big believer in the fact that the streaming situation is already getting old, that people are getting tired of it. There's too much, it's too expensive. The quality is being sacrificed for quantity.
Hmm.
And it gets to the point where the differentiator is a film well known enough to actually draw an audience, and theatrical marketing still is something that puts a film on the map in a way that no other medium can do. There's a lot of reasons for that, and you can say that some of them may have disappeared a little bit. We can get into that a bit later,
Sure.
but the reality is that all of the streamers are beginning to realize that having some kind of theatrical exposure actually makes these films more valuable for them.
Do you feel
Um,
that kind of goes along with the eventizing of a lot of films as well? Like, put it out there, make it feel special, make it feel experiential versus this thing where it's just like, oh no, it's got to be on your time at your home so you can be comfy or whatever. No, no, we're gonna make you come out. We're gonna make you have an experience with a group of people or with whatever. Do you feel that that's kind of the idea of why that is still where streamers even are pushing films.
yeah, I mean, eventizing helps to get people into limited events. Like, the classic idea of an eventized movie is when the filmmaker does Q&As the way that they would do it at a film festival, or
Yeah.
you have a speaker at the end of it, or if it's a film about food, you have serve food. I mean, just ways of making it into more of a live event.
Yeah.
It's very hard to do that on a scalable basis because, how many places can people be? How many theaters are there that really have either the person power or the resources to be able to do that on a day-to-day basis? And I think that if it was too much of it, that people would get just as tired of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Think that the way to scale eventizing is to forget that it exists and sell the experience of just going to the movies with other people. There were a ton of movies this past year that seeing them in movie theaters made an enormous difference in terms of appreciating what those movies are. And I think what a lot of people get wrong, certainly the pundits, the press, a lot of folks who keep writing about the death of theatrical moviegoing,
Mm.
is that there's, people want to be with other people. And there's an aspect of movie going that has to do with the attention span of the immersion into what it is they're seeing. And the thing that I was referring to a moment ago that people get wrong is that they keep saying that the movies that deserve to be seen on the big screen in a movie theater are the big blockbuster science fiction movies, the ones that are really loud. One of my pet peeves, by the way, is that theaters set the volume for those movies and then they don't turn them back down when they're showing other movies.
Yep.
Um, but that those are the kinds of spectacles that people are going to be drawn to movie theaters for. I think things are kind of the opposite way around, which is that these movies that are, are shown at film festivals, that are by great directors, that require your full attention, that ask questions that are not easily answered, that take their time to tell their stories. Those kinds of movies, when you watch them at home, it's way too tempting to hit the pause button, change the channel, to run to the bathroom, run to the refrigerator, oh, this is too slow, I'm falling asleep. If you're seeing it in a movie theater where you're forced to pay your full attention to the one screen without those distractions, all of a sudden you start to see things that you don't see on the home screen.
Yeah.
So you're not giving those movies your full attention when you're watching them at home.
Yep.
So I'm a huge believer in the fact that, if you look at things like, Perfect Days, or even Anatomy of the Fall, or I'm trying to think of other examples that I've seen recently in movie theaters. I would say that even Oppenheimer is a movie that the chronology is so jumbled, it requires so much attention to be able to actually put the pieces together and figure out what's going on. That seeing that at home, I bet a lot of people are not going to make it through the whole movie.
And there's the aspect of, as well, of those films for home distribution being altered from their original theatrical cuts as well. Not so much content wise, but every version of something, whether it's a Blu-ray to a DVD to a streamed version, whatever, has their own mechanics in terms of what they require for those things, and so they require a bit of additional post production to make those assets happen. And you're not always seeing what that true director's cut, if you will, but not really. You know what I mean? The way the director wanted to be seen on the screen, you're not always getting that translated properly over to Blu-ray or something like that. And we're seeing that even now with these 4K transfers that are coming in, where they're using AI to help fill in things, or they're or to help with the color correction or something like that, and it's absolutely changing almost the meaning of the frame. And I think that's a really interesting kind of thing to get into. It's one thing, I think, when George Lucas says, I want to give you my version of this that I feel is something that I am putting my stamp on, and whether we like it or not, at least we know that it's coming from, like, what the changes are coming from George, versus this 4K transfer where of like The Abyss, where you're looking at a color transition that or from the color correction in post, and it's not true to what it originally was meant to look like. I'm sure there's some level of sign off on it, but is it really? I don't know. It's interpolation one way or another. But
Well, you're getting into the technical stuff, but it is a
I know.
different color space. It is,
Yeah.
if it's color corrected for the home screen,
Yep.
it's not going to be the same as it was when it was shown in a movie theater.
What is it about film and in general that got you so passionately into it that you stayed in it your entire adult life, let's say, and then to that direct to the tag on to that is, has your interest ever waned to a point where you said, I think I'm done? And I know that can't be too much, because you made a movie in 2019, which is not too far back. So, but yeah, I mean, where did it all begin for you?
Um, the origin story.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Bitten by a radioactive celluloid, you know?
yeah, I mean, I think the beginnings of it are very similar to a lot of people that I know in the business, which is that, my parents were into movies at the point when I was growing up. There weren't a whole lot of alternatives. I mean, so the movies were where you went as a family, or, whatever. I saw a lot of movies as a kid. I think I started to take movies more seriously in high school. My family moved around a lot, and as
Yeah.
a result, when we would get to a new place, I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I didn't have a whole lot of activities, and I just found myself feeling at home in a movie theater surrounded by strangers. It was just a way of socializing. So I just started, seeing as many movies as I possibly could. And you don't see this as much anymore, but a lot of the movies, but people don't remember this, but you go back to the pre-Jaws era, and movies would sit in movie theaters for months and
Yeah.
months and months. So it wasn't like you were being bombarded by new releases all the time. And during that era, I would go see movies 3, 4, 5 times, to the point where I could memorize the dialogue. So, those were kind of my formative experiences. I ran a college film society when I was in school. When I graduated from college, I ended up getting getting a job as a non-theatrical salesperson, which a lot of people probably don't even realize what that is. But I was essentially a salesperson talking to college film society bookers to get them to rent the movies that were in my catalog.
Huh.
So it was not just colleges, but I would be selling movies to film societies, colleges, libraries, performing arts centers. Sometimes depending on the theme of the movie, I'd be trying to, sell it to YMCA's and to whatever. So it's kind of interesting that there was a whole generation of people who ended up in independent film, in theatrical independent film, who actually started in the non-theatrical area. It was a way where you kind of caught on very quickly to the way that commerce is done in the business,
Hmm.
to the mechanics of it, to, how do you talk about a movie to get people interested in wanting to book it. I had this formative experience after that first job that I was talking about, where I got hired by United Artists as a freelancer to rewrite the entire United Artists catalog. And there was something like 4,000 titles in that catalog. And that it isn't like I went and watched all of them. That would have been impossible. But what I did was I read up on each of the movies and then wrote just a capsule paragraph that was trying to be sell copy, to try to entice people to be interested in seeing that movie. I'm convinced that that experience was the reason why I became so good at Twitter, because I could encapsulate a movie in, really few characters. But it also familiarized me with an incredible number of classic movies. The UA catalog at that time included all the MGM films, all the pre-1949 Warner Brothers movies, and the entire UA catalog.
That's the Bond movies. You
It,
had the
it
Bond
was it was
franchise in
a
there.
lot of movies. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of my origin story. Once I got into the business, my experience at Cinema 5, which is the company that first hired me out of college, and is what I made my movie about. The guy who ran that company was a real character. And during the course of approximately 3 years that I worked at that company, I went from non-theatrical sales to theatrical sales to co-op advertising to running the advertising department to running acquisitions, all within 3 years. And the reason I was given those opportunities had nothing to do with my inherent talent. It had to do with the fact that this guy was kind of a lunatic, and would hire people who, I mean, give people jobs that they were really unqualified for. And in every single case when I was moving up the food chain, I had to learn on the job. But it was a small enough company that I literally learned every inside out and backwards part of the movie business: exhibition, distribution, marketing, acquisitions, deal making. I had no training in any of that, and I learned it all on the job.
It's interesting because most of the folks that we have on this show are for people on the other side of that world. They're the filmmakers or the actors or people in front of the camera. And I love it when I have an opportunity to talk with other people who are in that marketing space, sales space, who understand the mechanics of how to put a movie out there, because I find that to be the largest gap of in both education and budgeting of every filmmaker's experience. It's one of the reasons why I did the book. It's all that kind of stuff. But from you've also had I will say folks have had the pleasure of having you as their teacher as well. And I don't know what kind of teacher you are, but it must be good. You were around for a while, although 10 years wonderful. But no, what did you find that when you were teaching that folks who were kind of just embarking on their film journey, independent or otherwise, what was the biggest skills that you find that they were lacking that you wanted to personally make sure, like, I just need to make sure that every student who leaves my classroom learns this one or several pieces of information?
I mean, truthfully, the answer to that is everything. I mean, the I gave a speech at a very early version of the IFP market. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it was probably in the early 80s, is my guess. And I was looking at that speech recently and realizing I could give that same speech now. It was all about how everybody wants to be a filmmaker and nobody wants to be the people creating audience. I shouldn't say nobody, because there are people out there who are doing it. But
Yeah,
the point is, it just doesn't have the same sexiness
yeah,
as the idea of making movies. And I was bemoaning out loud that I wished that all these creative, wonderful people who understood movies could turn their attention to the marketplace. Not, like I don't want to give you the wrong idea because I'm not somebody who believes that the marketplace should dictate filmmaking,
Right.
but I do believe that filmmakers have to at least understand the marketplace, if nothing else, on a defensive basis, to be able to actually prepare themselves for all of the obstacles that are going to be thrown in their way.
That's a fantastic way of putting that, by the way. Like in a defensive way. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it just understand how it works and build up your defenses and be able to have a conversation. Like if you're a filmmaker and you walk in the room with your distributor, I mean, first of all, you have to be lucky enough that a distributor wants your movie. And
Hmm.
so now you've made the deal and they're calling you into a pro forma marketing meeting of some sort, which, means that at the very least you're going to have an opportunity to have a conversation with them. At that moment, if you open your mouth and you say really stupid things, things that make it clear that you're naive about the marketplace, that you really have no idea what you're talking about, you're going to lose the ability to have a say in what's going to happen to your movie. If you walk in and they get a feeling that you're savvy and that you actually pay attention to the way things are in the marketplace, then you're going to have a much better ride because there will be a conversation. If they respect you and they believe that you have some idea of what you're talking about, some sort of reasonableness about your ideas as opposed to being like, way out here someplace,
Yeah.
then you're going to get a hearing.
Yeah, and I was talking with Joe Lynch not too long ago as well, and we talked a lot about like willing collaboration as well. I think Bria Grant also had a very similar outlook on it as far as making and selling their movies, where they were saying, we found that a lot of our most successful relationships with people in sales and marketing just came about because we were not standoffish about it. We were educated. I think that's obviously first and foremost, but we were also willing to be collaborative. We weren't saying I'm the director, it's got to be this way, or oh yeah, you just handle everything. Like if we wanted input, we wanted to be able to put our stamp on something, whether it was a poster or whether it was a trailer or something. We're not going to necessarily tell you how to do your job, but as a courtesy, like yeah, we'd like to kind of take a peek and offer some level of input. And I think that kind of more hands-on approach also keeps the hands on the wheels from the people that you're selling to or that you're doing business with, just to let them know also like yeah, I got an eye on things. But I think also makes it so that when it is being put out, it's something that you're happy to be part of the process of, and you're knowledgeable about when you come on a show like this or you're doing like red carpet stuff or whatever.
Yeah, I mean that that
Yeah.
that is an important part of things is talking through how to. I don't want to use the word behave. That's a bad word.
Right.
How to handle the public relations end of your job, which begins long before you make your movie. I mean, learning how to talk about your movie, learning it goes, like back to where I was talking about writing all those things about all those UA movies. I'm sort of shocked. As an Academy member, I have access to the world's greatest Netflix because because like I have access to the Academy portal to see every movie that's eligible for the Oscars every year. By the way, just an aside,
Hmm.
I see the vast majority of those movies in movie theaters. But when it comes to crunch time and I've got to watch, as many movies as I possibly can, that's when I'm hunkered down on my couch watching everything that I don't have access to otherwise. But the only reason I bring this up is because the Academy allows you, when you submit a movie and you put it up on that portal, to do a one paragraph synopsis of the movie. And when I look at those synopses, I say to myself, who is working with these people? I mean, like how could they possibly think that that synopsis is going to either prepare the movie, prepare the audience for what they're going to see, and or attract them to want to see their movie as opposed to the other 50 that they haven't seen that they have access to. And it just shocks me that so little thought is put into those things. And I might add that, I've been pointing a lot of this at filmmakers, but there's a lot of distributors who don't know how to do that stuff either.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I was I saw a video not too long ago. I think I brought it up on the show before. Karen Chien was at the Color Congress talking about distribution for independent films. Her kind of bailiwick is independent films coming in from China, and especially the ones that are banned and all that, and getting those out into the American marketplace. And one of the things that she was bemoaning, and rightfully so, is that so many of the distributors that used to be around are now production companies. They're no longer distributors, or they're so very selective what they're putting out there because they're putting out their own branded stuff. That seems to be a more common trend. The email recently went out from Film Hub saying Tubi's getting into original productions, and because of that, they're going to start becoming more selective. And that was the go-to market for many filmmakers. Its lower budget levels, and that was frustrating for a lot of people. I had one friend of mine, friend of the show, who his whole thing was like, he was trying to make a movie for 50 grand, and his entire distribution plan was, I'll go to Film Hub, sell it through them, and then I'll get it up over on Tubi, and then we'll get some kind of a thing there. And regardless of whether or not, whatever his plan to finish that out is, that one door is now closed to him. And it seems like that keeps happening every couple of years. And of course, other doors open and everything, because we said before, things are cyclical and something else will pop up. But also, some things are timely for certain people. Like, if you're going to go out and you're pitching investors on making something, and they're asking things like potential time for, not reimbursement's not the name, but return on investment, or something like that, and your distribution plans are delayed by 3 years, well, you're gonna have to include that. Like, that's gonna have to be
Yeah, I
a
mean,
discussion.
this is another aspect of the business that is cyclical, but which, the appetite for independent film expands,
Yeah,
contracts. The history is riddled with companies that started out as mostly acquisitions driven, which has the advantage of a distributor seeing a movie finished. So you know what you're getting. You have to use your imagination in terms of how you're going to sell it, who the audience is, and all that other stuff, and also come up with a price, a deal that makes some sort of sense relative to the potential audience. But at least you're seeing the finished film.
yeah,
Every one of those companies, it's so, if they have a fair amount of success, the next step is always, well, we're going to go into production. Well, there's, a couple of good reasons on the surface for going into production. One of which is that the acquisitions market has its own expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. The number of companies that are bidding for films, the good films or the commercial films at any given time, expands, contracts. So at any given moment, you could be stuck with, oh my God, we don't have anything on our release slate. We don't have any, how are we going to, how are we going to continue to release movies if we're bidding against this many companies, or there's so few movies available, or, all. So it's a way of kind of controlling your fate to some extent, but production is so much riskier. It's so much riskier that not only is it more expensive typically than acquisitions, you can make the case that the best acquisitions, of course, are more expensive than production. But the other part of it is that you don't get to see the finished film. You're taking a flyer on, whether the film is going to be everything that it can be based on what you're seeing on the page and the package. There's a tendency to, in order to make a movie feel safer, it gets packed with elements, star power, known name director, anything based on IP, all
right.
of those things that make it seem like it would be a safer bet.
Yep.
But when you add all those things up, they end up not necessarily making it a safer bet, but making it a blander movie, or something that is not going to be, the quality is not going to live up to what might have happened if this had been some sort of maverick movie made independently, where people were not sizing it up from a marketing perspective when it was going into production initially. So essentially, that cycle happens all the time. And then these companies overextend themselves with productions. And then they either end up going out of business, or they go back to acquisitions again, or it's like it starts all over again.
Yeah. It's the idea of markets within markets is also kind of interesting. Like you said, there's, you're looking at, expansion, contraction over in, you'll have home video sales or non-theatrical sales, and you'll have expansion, contraction over here. And then, the idea of, how, and also just the general marketplace of, because I think there's movies and then there's other things. It's really interesting to me because you have filmmakers who tend to, they're very passionate. Filmmakers are, I want to make a movie. I have an idea in my head. I want to see it realized. I want to put it out into the world. I want people to enjoy it. I want to garner an audience. And then when they do it, they're like, I love this. This is what I love. I want to do this for a career. The only problem I find with that is that most people don't approach it as a career. They approach it as a thing they want to do or the thing they are doing, but they don't have all of the educational background of doing it. And let's be honest, not everyone can afford to go to film school. I get that, like, and I certainly can. My film school was that Tarantino thing of just, I work at Blockbuster Video. I worked as a projectionist for 20 years. I saw everything I could put my hands on. And then when I got, a little bit into the industry, I talked to everybody I could who, like yourself, like had been around for a while and had interesting and great stories. What is it about, I think you kind of touched on it earlier, where you said, these are not the sexy things, you know? What is really standing in the way of filmmakers being, any filmmaker being outside of the creative part, being the next Soderbergh, being the next Kevin Smith, being the next Tarantino, Rodriguez? The technology is there. It has been now for probably the better part of a decade, and I don't think that it's creativity that is standing in their way. I think we have so many people that are creative, and even with the pandemic, there was so much time for people to develop, and we're seeing a lot of that with screenwriters. What is the thing that is standing in the way of people becoming the next breakout, the next Paranormal Activity, or the next Blair Witch, or something like that?
It's a good question.
It's probably, yeah, it's not an easy
It
one,
goes
obviously.
back to some, like I feel like the answer to that is looking at it backwards, which is that I don't think that was ever easy.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like I think that there's one of the dichotomies that we have to deal with is that film is an art form, a means of expression. There are many, many different ways of using the medium, some of which could have a commercial element to it, and others of which um, don't. Some of which are purposely not trying to work in the commercial realm. Um, Others of which aspire to it but fail. It's just, like there's so many different roads depending on somebody's sensibility. The the I made an independent film and it went to Sundance and I sold it for 5 times what it cost me to make thing is like a lottery ticket. It's always been like a lottery ticket. But if it happens, then there's a fork in your career where you can either, take all the offers that are being thrown at you for, to hit the mainstream, or to decide that you really want to work independently. Sometimes you hear about filmmakers who get offered that opportunity and then they find that it's a nightmare, that they just can't work within that system, and so they go back to some form of filmmaking that's outside of the mainstream.
Yeah.
um there are people who ride the wave for a while and then they get cold, where it doesn't seem like anything they touch turns to gold anymore. And
Yeah.
a lot of times late career filmmakers end up working for television because there were jobs there, where they can get hired to work on somebody else's material, as opposed to being an auteur.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways of looking at that. I just don't know that there is a formula for it, and so I don't look at it as being a current issue. It's more about just, I mean, I think that to have a satisfying life as somebody who makes movies, and when I say makes movies, I'm talking about producers, directors, writers, people who are involved in the creative elements of making movies.
Hmm.
I think that you have to start by trying to understand who you are as a filmmaker and where you might fit in. But there's that Sundance. I hate to harp on Sundance, but that's where the mythology sort of comes from.
Totally fine. I was going to talk to you about that this year's
Yeah, but
festival
but
next
but
anyway,
that
so you're
that
segueing perfectly.
right. But that sort of lottery ticket
Yeah.
is that mythology, I think, hurts our general ecosystem in that there's always this feeling, no matter what you're working on, that you're 5 minutes away from becoming rich and famous.
Yeah.
And it's because we're jumbling all this stuff up that doesn't belong together. The Hollywood film business is an industry that's serving particular types of audiences in particular ways. And as technology changes, they're going to change with the times and they're going to figure out how to turn it into some kind of business. And that's been true all along its history, where technology changes, the way that people consume films change, and that the studios eventually figure out a business model that works.
Yeah.
We know that they're all completely flummoxed right now in terms of what their business model ought to be.
Yeah, it's
But then
definitely a
there's this other,
throw the spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks kind of thing. I'm
yeah, yeah, I
finding.
mean that's exactly right. But then there's this whole other thing of people who are making movies for other reasons. And like I said, they sometimes get seduced into the system, whether they like it or not. It's hard to turn down big money. It is.
Yeah.
And sometimes they have to have the experience at least once of working within that system before they realize they never want to have anything to do with it again.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know whether that really answered your question, but
No, that's fine. I think you're absolutely right about the idea. I think it's no different than going and working for a giant corporation and then finding out that your life is not fulfilling by sitting in a cubicle all day for 20 years, And also the idea of like, I think when we look at more modern kind of takeaways when it comes to business and working, the folks that are younger than me entering the workforce and they decide I want to be in a creative industry, just be like, okay, well, you know what? The days of the work somewhere 20, 30 years and get the gold watch don't really exist anymore. So is this any more or less safe than working for a company for 5 years and getting laid off? The money's better elsewhere probably, and the idea of the security is going to be better, but it's definitely not going to be as creatively fulfilling. And I feel like that the later generations where we are now, the new kids, so to speak, they're more about what is having a life that is more creatively fulfilling versus and with the risk attached to that of maybe I just will have roommates until I'm 45, and so yeah, I definitely kind of I get that. You bring up Sundance being the like the a lottery ticket kind of thing. Do you feel that it is still the type of lottery ticket it was back in the 90s where that ticket was kind of a mega millions ticket versus now where it's just like a local lotto, you might get a few bucks type of thing, or has that marketplace kind of dried up a little bit? Is it still that? I mean, we're not doing those table, the old Weinstein, napkin deals on a table thing anymore, from what I understand.
This year, tons of deals, many, many millions of dollars changing hands. I,
Did
you
not
know,
seem to be purported as such. Like a lot of people, even earlier in Sundance, the news was like, there doesn't seem to be anything happening. Now we know some of those deals get made beforehand to get announced, but it seemed this year that the Sundance was a little on the down low. Like they were kind of a little quieter than usual. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, no, I just, maybe it was just premature reporting, but Netflix has now bought three movies, one of which was a $15 million deal for a horror film, and then two documentaries, both of which got fair amounts of money. Um, Searchlight bought a big pain for $10 million. Trying to remember, there were a couple of other I mean, Amazon bought one movie that was a big sale. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm not remembering all off the top of my head. And I look, I
There's
don't
a
look at the
lot. There's a lot that
I don't
happens.
look at the statistics from year to
Right.
year to see is it more movies, less movies, are the numbers higher, or the numbers lower. What I can say is that it falls into a pattern again of like there's this one layer of movies that makes those big deals. As long as there's more than one company in the marketplace that's bidding for the biggest movies, the numbers are keep going up and up and up.
Right.
And while there's nothing approaching, I think that the record deal at Sundance might have been Coda.
Yeah.
Was that like 20 million or something like that?
Yep.
So nothing got quite that high. But by the way, I bet Apple wishes they didn't spend $20 million for Coda, or maybe they think it's okay because it did win Best Picture. So, but yeah, I mean, and then there's this whole other layer of movies that don't tend to sell at the festival,
Yeah.
though that the smaller distributors sit around and wait, for the dust to clear. They have plenty of opportunity to catch up on the movies that they didn't get a chance to see at the festival. And they look for opportunities. Wow, this movie was overlooked. You know what? It's probably not going to be that expensive, so let's try to make a deal, for that sort of thing. I
Right.
don't think it's that different from, the hysteria that people think used to exist. During the Weinstein era, yeah, there were some big bidding wars that were all night and, blah, blah, blah. But there weren't more than a small number of them every year. It's just maybe just got more ink. I don't know.
Just a better story. Is that kind of what I think a lot of things come down to in marketing is really just comes down to who wrote the better story at the end, who reported it better.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, look, going back like a couple of questions ago when you were
mhm.
talking about people who want to be in the creative businesses. I feel like my experience as a distributor and a marketer was about as creative as any business could ever be. The idea of looking at a movie and trying to see what is special about this movie and how can I position it in a way to get people dying to want to see it. And I do it to this day, even with movies that I see where I want to talk other people into seeing them. Where, walking around Sundance and like we're comparing notes with people on the buses where it's like, what have you seen? And it's like, oh my God, my favorite movie was blah, blah, blah. And you start describing the movie. And I know that I'm doing it in the same way as if I was marketing that movie, that, I love the idea of getting people enthusiastic about films. And to me, that's about as creative as it gets.
Yeah, that is also my favorite. One of my favorite parts about walking around to film festivals is talking to people and asking them like, "What is your favorite film that's been here so far?" And by the way, then later, if I can run into the filmmaker and let them know that they impacted someone like that usually gets a tickle out of them. So they tend to appreciate that.
Yeah, you just got to
Um,
be careful on the buses at Sundance that the filmmaker's not standing right behind you when you're dissing their movie.
I had the uncomfortable pleasure of screening a movie once when I was living in LA. I was working at one of the studios and I was screening a movie there and I was the projectionist and I just happened to step outside during the movie just to get some air and the director, well, it was kind of towards the end of the movie and the director was outside smoking a cigarette and he goes, "So what'd you think?" And I'm like, "Love the soundtrack." Like, and the amount of time it took me to come up with that even was too long, like 2 seconds too long, and that was very embarrassing. But because I don't want to, I don't, I don't want to see bad movies. I don't think anyone wants to. I think it's been said to death. No one goes out to make a bad movie. I think
Right.
that even I think most movies, even that are considered bad, have like in some ways redeemable aspects to them, whether it's a specific character or a specific actor who played something or great lines or really good color, like color in terms of like lighting or something like that, or it's a soundtrack or something. You can always find something. But it's that was particularly for me, yeah, that was a tough one. I tend to, when I go to festivals and I'm walking out of a movie or whatever, because I get very chummy with filmmakers, but they all want to know what I thought because I'm a film critic and because I was there and I've been chummy. And there, I'm like, we'll talk later, or like, yeah, it was really, I had a good time. I had a good time at the festival. I try not to kind of give that away because I'm like, oh, I'll write a review of it later. You can find out what I liked. Haha, yeah, it's really tough. Now, I want to ask you a marketing question. When if you're going to bring on a new client who's like, hey, whether or not it's a whole company looking to market an entire catalog of something, because you're working with an Italian company trying to bring some Italian movies out into the American market, right? Or is that still
Yeah, I mean,
going on?
it's it's funny that you put it that way, but I'm a consultant for Cinecittà, which is the government agency that handles all Italian films.
There you go.
I manage a P&A fund for them. So in effect, any Italian film that gets released in the United States, I'm usually part of the equation in terms of how that film gets marketed.
Fantastic. Well, when you're working with either them specifically, because that's a government, so I'm sure there's definitely some red tape that goes on there. But any other client too, that or someone who might even come up to you and for some consultation on their film, even someone who meets you at a film festival and says, "I have a film, I'm looking to get it out there. Any advice or anything?" What is the first thing that you tell most people to do? I have a feeling part of it is going to be learn to how to discuss your film, like that encapsulated kind of thing. I think that's a big thing. I kind of loved how you were talking about that earlier. I used to say that like the OG Twitter was the perfect logline generator for people because it was just the right amount of characters, and if you got it right, that's probably you could sell most people on that. It was just short enough. But yeah, what would you say your first kind of go to piece of advice for most people is?
Well,
My
there's one general piece of advice, which is get the film right before you start submitting it to film festivals. You don't want to have the world premiere of your film in front of the world's press and in front of all the buyers without having made sure that the movie is finished. It's like it's just bad news to have, your first audience be the one that's going to, make the film either survive or fail. So that would be one thing is don't rush to get it ready for a particular film festival. Try to, have screenings for friends and, anonymous audiences if you can do it and sit in the back and gauge interest and get notes from people and, give it some thought, maybe take a month off, take a rest and come back and look at the movie again. I mean, just don't rush it for a festival because if you do, you're going to end up being upset that you did. So that's
that's
one
actually
thing.
really good advice. That
Yeah.
is, and I wouldn't have expected that. That's really good advice. Yeah.
But then when you get to what's the next step, I mean, it really depends. My philosophy is every movie is different. Every movie is unique. And that when you start having any sort of cookie cutter approach to how you're going to put it into the marketplace, that's when things don't work.
Right.
If you start copying whatever the last person did or whatever your last success was, or oh, this is what the marketplace is asking for right now, or
Yeah.
any of that kind of stuff, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
You've got to, I look at a movie for the first time, I let it wash over me. I try to understand what it's trying to do. I talk to the filmmakers about, when I'm in the marketing position, I try to talk to the filmmakers about what their intentions are. Um, there was these parts of the movie that I was a little confused about. Explain to me what was going on. These are all things that I need to understand in order to figure out a strategy for the movie. Where does it belong? What's the right festival? Who are the potential buyers? What are we featuring in our materials that are going to entice people to want to see it? How do we present it in a way that the film delivers on, as opposed to um, worrying about, being the least common denominator and appealing to as many people as possible.
Yep.
So it really is about understanding the movie. there have been times when I rubbed filmmakers the wrong way because in the very early stages of trying to understand a movie in order to market them, I can be a little bit of a negatron. I can, like I can nitpick to death all of the things that I think other people might nitpick.
Yeah.
And by bringing them up and discussing them, we come up with ways of working around them, ways of talking about the movie that create the right set of expectations
Yeah.
that the film delivers on, and sort of paper over those things or explain those things that require explanation because it may not be clear to the people who made the movie that those things could be misinterpreted. My documentary, which I made all by myself, and I mean, when I say that, I just mean I had no institutional support whatsoever. I had, people helping me out, but I was doing it on a shoestring, and because I was interviewing a lot of people who were 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds, and I was worried. They were worried. When I asked them to be participate in the film and to be interviewed on camera, oh, I don't know if I can remember anything. I hate being on camera. There was a lot of that kind of stuff. So I purposely, as a strategy, made sure that every time I did an interview, we got into the room and out of the room as quickly as possible. I tried to make setup be minutes. I tried to make sure we were rolling as quickly as possible. I tried to make it as no sweat as possible. So guess what that means? That means that the framing's not going to be perfect, that I'm not going to be moving the plants around and the lighting around to get the perfect image and all of that kind of stuff. So when it came to writing the press kit for the movie, I had to explain myself because it doesn't look like the one of those fancy documentaries with drone shots and the and where everything is impeccable. But I knew I was doing that, and I did it for a reason. And it's one of the reasons why these old people actually opened up to me when I was interviewing them was because I didn't stress them out.
Yeah.
And the minute you start moving stuff around and lighting and all that other stuff, you're going to stress these people out.
Yeah.
So I had to make sure that was part of my message to anybody who was going to be reviewing the movie or sizing it up for any reason to understand that the way it looked was purposeful.
Right.
So, and I was aware of it, So it's just a small example using my own personal movie to show you the kinds of things that you've got to deal with. If that had been somebody else's movie and I said to them, you know what? Are parts of this movie where like the framing's a little weird, whatever, and would they have been insulted? Maybe, but if there was an explanation, I wanted to know the explanation.
Yeah. No, and I've had those conversations with filmmakers where they'll say like it's a budget thing, or I wanted to use natural lighting here, and I'm like, well, you didn't do yourself any favors, but okay, at least now I know, whatever. But you brought up a fantastic point with that, which is setting expectations, and I think that that's partially that's the contract I think between marketing and the audience is I'm supposed to be letting you know what this movie, book, whatever this piece of format that you're about to digest is about and what to expect going into it and how you should feel coming out of it. And I feel like that's where the ball gets dropped so often with, when someone says, I've heard this said a bunch of times in the last few years of like, with Wonka or something like that, where like that wasn't the movie I thought I was walking into. I enjoyed Wonka. It was not what I thought it was going to be. People have been saying recently like, oh, they're not marketing musicals as musicals or something of that nature.
Yeah, yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah, I think that the idea of setting those expectations is a fantastic thing, and yeah, the explaining away or finding finding those things that and getting ahead of those little nitpicks and stuff like that, I think is part of that. And I think that there's a little bit of you know there's a little bit of BS that goes along with, the idea of marketing, it's like, oh, if we say it, then, hopefully someone else won't say it, or something like that. But the idea also of the strategy. I mean, I run a marketing company. I work with a lot of folks as well. I'm working with two authors right now, and the first thing that we talk to them about when we bring them on, when we do onboarding, is, okay, well, we need to sit down and we need to come up with a strategy that is singular to you and what you're trying to do and your audience and your competitors and your, or perceived competitors, or whatever the marketplace is looking like. And also tell me what your goals and expectations are, and before we even look at things like budget necessarily, like, let's sit down and let's figure out, what do you hope to get out of this? And I think that we touched upon it slightly in the beginning, which was a filmmaker also asking themselves, when they're entering the business, asking themselves, what do I want to get out of this? Whether it's, from when they're starting their movie, or when they are trying to sell it in the marketplace. What is and I find that a lot of them undervalue their selves and their films. Especially when I hate the thing when I hear someone say, "Oh, I'll just put it up on YouTube for free." I'm like, that don't do that. Like not it might your movie might not be for everyone, but there's someone out there who will pay money for that. Like, you haven't found the audience yet.
I would, I frankly wouldn't discourage them from doing that, because if that's their idea of what they want to do, they want to just put it out there, then they're saying something about themselves that you could take it a positive way too.
It's true.
Look, I feel like everybody, like I said earlier, everybody's a different reason to
Right.
want to be a filmmaker, and I wouldn't dismiss any of those reasons. I just think that you have to know who you are. If you can't answer the question, why are you making movies, then you've got a problem.
Fair enough. Now, let me ask you, so you finally got an opportunity to go behind the camera and make your own movie. How was that experience, and is it something that you would look forward to doing again?
Well, I should say that when you say that, I've produced a ton of movies.
Right, totally.
So
Yeah.
as a producer, I've been making movies for a very long time, and I'm continuing to. I have movies I'm working on right now. But the fact that I directed that particular movie, it was an aberration based on being a very personal story and the realization that I was the only one who could tell it. And so I got it out of my system.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ask me, would I do it again? The answer is I would never say never,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm certainly not looking to do it again. I'm very happy being a producer. It was a wonderful experience making that movie. It could have easily been a disaster. I mean, when I think about what I went through making it, the fact that there is a movie at the end of the day, to me, was enough satisfaction that I was glad that I did it. But the reality is and by the way, the other satisfaction is that it's on the Criterion Channel for anybody who wants to watch
Ooh.
it. It's played in theaters, and it's available on all the pay platforms, but it's also on the Criterion Channel.
Have you had a chance to go into the Criterion closet?
Oh, I've been in the Criterion closet many times.
Oh.
Yeah.
What if you were in there right now? Do you know what movie you'd grab?
I'd have to look at what their new releases are, because I have a pretty big collection. But yeah, I have my personal taste. We're completely changing subjects, which is
Totally.
just fine. The my personal taste in movies runs toward um, uh, you know American movies from the 60s and 70s, and maybe a little bit into the 80s, but 60s and 70s was my sweet spot. And so I have a tendency to keep rebuying the same movies over and over again when there's a new transfer, new restoration, new whatever. Um, yeah.
Do you have an opinion at all on and I know I've already run you an hour, so I want to thank you and I want to respect your time. So this could be the last question if you like, or if you have anything else you definitely want to talk about. I'm here as long as you want to be. But you have all these great companies out there like Vinegar Syndrome and Arrow and all that are doing a lot of these more collectible editions of these movies from the past, new transfers, along with a bunch of usually well written essays by prominent folks, Matt Zoller Seitz, or Walter Chaw or something like that. you have those folks, doing all these. Do you think that that is a the idea of collectors or collecting is kind of I feel like there's been some missed opportunities there with independent film, and I realize some of that is budgetary, but for the lower budget folks. But the idea of preserving some of these, or as collectors items. Do you have an opinion at all on, should we be seeing more of this, or is this a, you know well, if we can get the rights to do it, or yeah, I know that there, or do you just have an opinion on the idea of like rebranding, bringing these things back out again?
I think
That was a horrible question. I apologize.
there's a sort of collector historian in me somewhere
Yeah.
where I believe very strongly that the heritage of film culture has to be preserved in some fashion. And there in other countries, the governments are taking care of making sure that they're to the extent that the materials are actually still there, that they're making sure that little by little they're either restoring and or preserving their entire film heritage. In the United States, at least at the moment, the studios do a pretty good job of at least protecting their stuff, not necessarily keeping them in circulation or restoring them or anything else, but at least making sure, with the exception of like a big fire at Universal where a bunch of movies burned up,
Yep.
um, but yeah, so I think that the studios do a relatively good job. I think that there is currently a crisis in the independent films, specifically from the 80s and 90s. It goes back a little further than that in some cases too, but specifically from the 80s and 90s, which were a boom time when a lot of independent films got made, which were co-financed among, the way the films in those days were made was that they brought together financing from multiple sources, sometimes foreign and domestic, sometimes a home video company and a domestic distribution company, or whatever. And many of those distribution deals expired a long time ago. The films fall out of circulation. The rights, it's unclear who inherits them. And the materials, most of the labs that were working in those days have cleared out their vaults. Nobody knows who owns the material or where it sits. If you ask the filmmakers who made those movies where any of this lies, either the materials or the rights, they don't have a clue.
Yeah.
And so that brings me to a really good segue, which is that I'm involved with this organization called Missing Movies. You can look it up at missingmovies.org. And we've been trying to educate both audiences and the industry as to the fact that this crisis exists. And we've been tackling making a list of movies that are missing. We started with a list of the movies that played in competition at Sundance over its history to see how many of them were out of circulation. And we came up with something like 800 titles that are
Wow.
that are not available anywhere.
That's crazy.
And so, starting with that list, and we've been expanding it by people offering up suggestions of films that ought to be on the list, et cetera. And so we've tackled a few projects, and we're trying to figure out a way to educate filmmakers to make sure A, filmmakers working today don't end up with the same problem, and B, to help filmmakers who find themselves in this situation to navigate things both legally as well as technically. So that's the idea behind it. And our first little triumph was Nancy Savoca's film Household Saints, which was a movie that, in a way, inspired us to create the organization. I was involved with that film as a co-financier when I was at Fine Line. Nancy and Rich Gay, her husband and producer, have remained friends. And that film, it took a long time to do the research, to find the rights, to find the materials. It's now been restored beautifully. It's being distributed by Milestone Films through Kino, and the restoration premiered at the New York Film Festival, and it's in theaters right now.
That's
So,
fantastic.
if we can recreate that for a lot of these lost films, that would make me very happy.
Well, and if there's anything that we can do to help with that, and we being the royal we, it's all just me here at Film Snobbery, but let me know, because that is something that I'm very passionate about, especially with, more on the more modern side. There's so many films and filmmakers that, are creating things. Everything's digital now, so you don't have a print.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm an engineer. I was a network engineer. I know how easy it is for a hard drive to fail. I know what the shelf life of a hard drive is,
Right.
or a solid state drive. I understand how all those
I'll
things
show
work.
I'll show you my preservation program for my documentary because it's sitting right here.
Oh, fantastic!
It's an LTO. This is my whole movie right here.
That's fantastic.
It's a lot better than having 35 millimeter materials, but yeah.
Yep. Oh, backup LTO drives.
Yep.
Yep. And those aren't that expensive to have either. I mean, we used to do those all the time at different client sites for their, for their bookkeeping. Never mind their films.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a great idea. Absolutely. Yeah. Obviously you hear, Nolan and Scorsese and all these guys, they get very much into film preservation. And I'm 100% so far for that, because there's so many movies going even back to, the silent era, even up through the 40s, that are just gone because, for one reason or another, or because it was on nitrate and it caught fire, or, was lost or exposed to elements or whatever. And so I'm also very passionate about those things, because this is such it's such a difficult industry that the last thing you need at the end of the day is that thing you worked for 3 years plus on and spent, whether it's your own money or someone else's, so much money on, to just not even exist anymore, and it's part of our cultural history as well, and it becomes also, part of world history. I mean, there's a lot of filmmakers that are foreign that have made films about their heritage and their culture that, are not necessarily U.S. based culture, what we think of it. And those things are lost as well. So that is fantastic. So missingmovies.org. I'm actually going to check that out the minute we get off this call. But no, that is fantastic. Yeah, that hits me in all the right places. So that's fantastic. I definitely want to thank you for taking the time to come on today. You have a career that is so aspirational to a person like myself, who I don't necessarily have as much intention of being in front of a camera. This is on accident. I never wanted to be in front of a camera even doing this, but here we are. But as far as from a marketing perspective, from your career with Fine Line, Emerging Pictures, all these, all the Deutchman Company, all that kind of stuff that you've done over the years, and the fact that you're an educator as well, is just something that I just respect so much. And from what you've seen and what you've been a part of in the history of the independent film in the last several years, it's a couple of decades. I'm really trying hard not to age you right now, but it's just something that I've always thought highly of, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk to me about it, because this is
Yeah, my pleasure. It was a fun conversation and we covered a lot of bases. So
yeah, definitely. And hopefully if I get down to New York sometime, I absolutely would love to have more conversation with you over coffee or something like that. But yeah, in the meantime, if there's anything that we can do to help out, again, missingmovies.org to our friends out there. You have your website over at iradeutchman.com, and we can find you on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days. You're at
it'll always
NY
be
Indie
Twitter to
Guy,
me.
right? Always be the bird. The bird
Yeah.
is the word.
Yeah.
But yeah, at NY Indie Guy. And yeah, is there anything else I'm forgetting, sir?
No, 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 no. You've covered it all. But thank you for all the kind words and hello to anybody who's listening.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, anyone out there who is listening, there are actually some people that were in the chat room just listening, which is always nice. And the for those who are looking for the replay, it should be out usually within 24 hours or so of the live show. Otherwise, you can find me at FilmSnobbery.com. I'm at FilmSnobbery on Twitter and most other things as well. Please look out for my book coming out in June, Behind the Scenes of Indie Film Marketing, a Film Snobbery Field Guide. And and hopefully I'll get a good review from this gentleman about that at some point. That's being published by Routledge. That's coming out later, and hopefully you'll see myself at a film festival near you as I'm starting my little tour here of working with these festivals to kind of come out and talk about my book and do some filmmaker interviews and coverage and stuff like that. So hopefully, if you want me at your film festival near you, tell your festival people. That's how that's going to help. So thank you, and we'll see you next week. Once again, thank you to Ira Deutchman for coming on the show tonight, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Bye, everybody.